Okay, so picture this, Frank. There's this draft bill, right, sitting on a desk in Denver, just waiting. No number assigned, nothing. And there are only 14 working days left on the legislative clock, before everything shuts down. The clerk hasn't even logged it because Senator Rodriguez hasn't actually introduced it yet. But the thing is, every multi-state AI deployer out there, like every compliance program and every binder, they're all calibrating, like right now, around what happens to that draft before May 13th. It's wild.
It's absolutely wild, Amara. And that's the whole point, isn't it? Because the relevant fact about those 14 days is that Senator Rodriguez, who's, the Senate Majority Leader, the original sponsor of the controversial SB 24205, he actually has framework language drafted for a replacement. He's even said publicly that the working group, quote, kept the framework and the important parts of the policy. This new draft, it carries a January 1, 2027 effective date. If it's introduced and passed before May 13th, it just repeals SB 24205 before it even goes into effect. The current statute never operates. But right now, it's got no bill number. The clerk hasn't logged it. So the real question is, how many of those 14 days does Rodriguez need to walk that draft to a hearing, get it through committee, get it to a floor vote in both chambers, and then, get it on the governor's desk? The procedural minimum on a fast-moving Colorado bill is roughly 6 to 8 legislative days. He's got 14. The margin exists. The pen hasn't moved yet.
So this is the gap I really want to sit with for a moment because it's fascinating. There's a thing happening in the headlines, and then there's a thing happening in the calendars, and they are definitely not the same thing. The headlines, they're tracking the DOJ intervention, the Department of Justice filed. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon publicly described the Colorado law as requiring AI companies to, in her phrase, infect their products with woke DEI ideology. Acting AG Todd Blanche signed that certificate declaring the case of general public importance. That's all the visible action. But none of that controls what actually happens between now and May 13th, does it? What controls what happens is whether one specific senator walks one specific draft to one specific clerk, and the price of that uncertainty is being paid right now, quietly, I might add, on Kalshi.
Absolutely, Amara, that's it. And the contract you want to look at, to really see this in action, it's Fed AI Pre, U.S. federal preemption of state AI law in 2026. As of this morning, it's pricing at 0.28. 28 cents on the dollar that federal preemption resolves this calendar year. Now let's just, really break down what that 0.28 is actually saying. Executive Order 14365 directed the Secretary of Commerce to evaluate state AI laws and identify the onerous ones. That deliverable was due March 11th. It hasn't been published. The FTC was directed to issue a policy statement on preemption of state laws mandating deceptive conduct in AI models, also due in March, not issued. The FTC proceeding directed by Section 6 of the order, not initiated. So that's 3 internal deadlines from the executive's own framework, all passed, all unpublished. The market isn't pricing executive intent. The market, it's pricing executive follow-through, and the follow-through by the executive's own calendar is totally missing.
Wow, okay, so what does that 0.28 actually mean then for the person who has to decide this week where to spend a compliance dollar? What's the tangible impact there?
It means the dollar does not chase the executive order. It chases the calendar, right? And the comparison contract really makes that visible. Look at AI Reg EU. Will the EU finalize AI Act implementation guidelines by Q3? That's pricing 0.62 on deep liquidity. So in the same week, Capital is pricing the European institutional schedule meaningfully higher than the United States executive schedule. The trade press in Europe is full of language about regulatory paralysis, Council-Parliament negotiations, the digital omnibus trilogue. Reuters and FT have been carrying deadlock framing for months. But the order book at 0.62, it's reading the institutional pattern correctly. The August 2, 2026 application date for the bulk of AI Act obligations has held through every political pressure that has tried to move it. The Q2 2026 Transparent AI Systems guidelines are tracking. The asymmetry between 0.62 and 0.28, that's the priced gap between two governance regimes' relationships to their own declared schedules. Brussels publishes when it says it will publish. Washington publishes the executive order on the day it says, and then the deliverables just drift.
And the deployer, they absorb that asymmetry, don't they? Like, there's an operator somewhere right now, let's call her a generalist, running compliance for a mid-cap firm with EU exposure, US multi-state exposure, a chatbot product, and maybe like a small data pipeline relationship with a Chinese vendor. She is reading the exact same documents we are reading, right? She is funding her EU compliance machinery as a near certainty because the market priced it that way, and she can, read the same Kalshi page. But she's holding her US federal compliance investment under the strictest applicable state regime, which is Colorado until June 30th, unless Rodriguez introduces, unless the legislature passes, unless the governor signs. She's building maximum flexibility architecture rather than depth, because the underlying rule is just recalibrating. Every law firm advisory she's read in the last 6 months, Latham, Reed Smith, Gibson Dunn, Paul Hastings, White & Case, they're all telling her the same thing. Stay the course on state compliance. Build standardized programs covering the strictest applicable state. Track the federal track. Don't front-run it. Wait.
And the cost of waiting, Amara, is itself a mechanism. Because every quarter she runs those parallel programs, the cost of switching to a unified federal regime later just increases. The investment is sunk, the vendor contracts are signed, the training it's delivered. So if Congress eventually does pass a preemption statute, and Gibson Dunn and Paul Hastings have both described the path to that statute as facing significant headwinds before the midterms, by the time it passes, the patchwork has already been built into the operator's cost base. The political case for preemption actually gets weaker with each quarter of compliance investment, which means, the longer Rodriguez doesn't introduce his bill, the longer the legislature doesn't pass a replacement, the longer the executive's deliverables stay unpublished, the harder federal consolidation becomes politically. The loop is self-reinforcing. The rational behavior of every actor in the loop is to wait, and waiting is exactly what produces the lower floor that the next state legislature anchors its bill drafting against.
This is where I really want to slow down, Frank, because the temporal proximity of two specific events matters a lot. On April 24th, the DOJ intervened and AG Weiser stipulated. 3 days later, on April 27th, China's National Development and Reform Commission ordered Meta and Manus AI to unwind a $2 billion acquisition that the exact same agency had approved in December 2025. Two governance regimes, just 3 days apart, doing different versions of the same maneuver, using procedural authority to defer or, reverse a previously settled outcome. I mean, wow.
Sequence, not coincidence, right? The December approval of the Meta-Manus deal was a closed transaction. Data had already moved, founders had already restructured, and the NDRC issued one line citing failure to follow technology export and data outbound declaration procedures. The mechanism is procedural. They used a notice and declaration framework that exists in Chinese administrative law to reverse an action already taken. That's not a new regulation, Amara. That's procedural latency being exercised. And in Denver, the AG stipulation is also procedural latency, agreeing not to enforce until 2 weeks after a court rules on a motion that hasn't even been heard yet. Both governance regimes are demonstrating that procedural authority is more powerful than substantive law when the calendar is the binding constraint. The substance of SB 24205 is largely irrelevant if the procedural calendar shifts the enforcement window past the date when the substance itself changes, and the substance of that December acquisition approval, largely irrelevant if the procedural calendar reverses it after the data has moved. It's a profound point, really.
So, name the mechanism cleanly then for our listeners. Who holds the procedural authority in each case, and what is it like doing to the environment?
Okay, so in Denver, Senate Majority Leader Robert Rodriguez holds it. Whether he introduces, when he introduces, and what the introduced text contains determines which side of the fork the entire system takes. No other actor has the capacity to repeal SB 24205 before its effective date. In Beijing, the NDRC holds it. The same agency that approved the deal in December is the agency that reversed it in April. The procedural framework that legitimated the approval is the procedural framework that legitimated the reversal. In both cases, Amara, the effect on the environment is the same. Market participants who would build decisions on the prior settled position are absorbing the cost of the new uncertainty. And in both cases, the cost is being paid in legal services, quarterly, through Q4 of this year. into 2027. It's a huge, huge factor.
Right. What this means for the deployer in really concrete terms is that the line item in the budget called External Counsel Regulatory is where those two pressure systems we've been tracking actually meet. The executive orders, the framework documents, the CalSHE prices, the legislative calendars, all of it lands as quarterly invoices for ambiguity resolution. The 0.28 priced on Fed AI Prey is structurally the priced expectation that legal services costs continue at the current rate or even escalate through 2026. Capital isn't betting against regulation, Frank. Capital is betting on the legal services bill that uncertainty about regulation produces. That's wild.
And the most important line in this whole picture, for somebody trying to act on it, is the line that says the state legislatures watching Colorado are calibrating their own bill drafting against the Colorado outcome in real time. Maine, Nebraska, Massachusetts, New York, Michigan, California again under SB 1181 and SB 1159. Each of those legislatures has a working group, a draft, a sponsor, a session calendar. Each of those drafts shifts depending on whether SB 24205 is repealed before June 30th, defended in court, or allowed to take effect on the as-written record. Whatever happens in the next 14 working days in Denver becomes an input to the next 12 months of bill drafting in 9 other states. So when we say the rulebook race is being resolved in calendars, that's literal, not a metaphor. The calendars are the rulebook. Here's the harder return on this. If that May 13th adjournment passes without a bill number, the path collapses in a known sequence. AG Weiser begins rulemaking on SB 24205 as written. The XAI preliminary injunction clock starts 28 days after final rulemaking. The constitutional reckoning arrives on the as-written record, the record the working group's coalition spent a year trying to amend. Federal court rules, one direction or the other, the ruling becomes precedent that every other state legislature has to read. If it rules for XAI on preemption, the state-level path closes nationally. If it rules against, the federal path closes through midterms. Either ruling forces the next 12 months of bill drafting in those 9 states I named into one of 2 corners, and the operators in those states absorb the cost of the corner they end up in. The legal services line item I mentioned earlier is becoming, as we sit here, a strategic asset for firms with capital to absorb it and a structural disadvantage for firms without. By Q4, that gap is observable in market share. By mid-2027, it is durable. The harder return is not that AI regulation gets stricter, it's that the cost of operating across uncertain regulation gets distributed in a way that no rulebook contemplated, and that no executive order can reverse without itself becoming a regulation more burdensome than the patchwork it tried to replace. It's just a crazy, self-fulfilling prophecy.
So we end at the place where the analysis points forward, not backward, you know? The 14-day calendar is absolutely real. The pen is in one specific senator's hand. The procedural mechanisms in Denver and Beijing are demonstrating that authority resides where the calendar runs, and the calendar runs through procedural latency, not through declared intent. So what the deployer holds, what you hold if any of this lives near your desk, is now the question of what specifically to watch for in the next 2 weeks that will tell you which direction this resolved. So here's what to watch. The Colorado General Assembly publishes its docket on a public legislative tracker. Every bill introduced gets a number, in sequence on a date you can see. Senator Rodriguez's draft has no number right now. If a number appears for this bill in the next 14 working days, you'll know which fork result without anyone announcing it, because the announcement is already there in the framework you now hold. If the number doesn't appear by May 13th, you'll know which fork result without anyone announcing that either, because what comes next is a sequence. Rulemaking, 28 days, motion, ruling, and the sequence runs on its own clock. The CalSHE Fed AI PRE contract right now is at 0.28. Watch where it sits on May 14th. The price of authority is what authority does. The pen hasn't moved yet, the clock has.
Well, my dear listeners, as we wrap up this illuminating discussion, thank you so very much for tuning in. If our exploration into the subtle intricacies of regulatory calendars and market dynamics has resonated with you, please take a moment to like this episode, drop a comment, subscribe to our channel, or, best of all, share it with your network to help us grow. Your support truly makes a difference. And speaking of making a difference, Frank, for those watching the legislative tracker and the CalSHE contract, the next 14 days aren't just a countdown, they're a live demonstration of authority, aren't they?
Absolutely, Amara. What we're observing is how the lack of overt action, the absence of that bill number, becomes a powerful force in itself.
The market isn't just betting on a legislative outcome, it's pricing the continued operational cost of this uncertainty. The 0.28 on Kalshi isn't just a number. It's a direct reflection of businesses absorbing that wait-and-see cost quarter after quarter.
So the calendar, in essence, is the rule book that's being written, not by intent, but by the very act of waiting. It's a profound point about how governance truly functions in our interconnected world.
Precisely. The price of authority isn't what's declared, it's what's done, or in this case, what's deferred. And that deferral itself is actively shaping the regulatory landscape, creating a self-reinforcing loop where waiting becomes the most rational, yet ultimately costly, strategy for every player.